What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I have an idea. You guys always know the best videos start out that way. I have an idea. Okay, here's the thing. A lot of people are talking about the X-Men in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? And they're talking about the idea that like the X-Men will be brought in like Doctor Strange 2 or something like that because it's dealing with the multiverse and so on. The more I think about this, the more I'm not so sure that's the case. What if Kang introduced the X-Men to the MCU? All right, bear with me on this, right? So here's the thing. If we do see the X-Men before like their official full-on like movie debut, I honestly think it'll be like a cameo or something like that in Doctor Strange 2, something along those lines. I mean, again, the rumors have kind of thrown out there that like Professor X and Wolverine will have like a cameo or a role in Doctor Strange 2, although the role of Professor X looks like it's part of the Illuminati in an alternate reality, and I don't really know how they would justify the appearance of Wolverine, and I don't really care, so long as we get to see Hugh Jackman playing the character in some capacity. But let's say the actual plan here is to introduce the X-Men in like an actual film. Now, as I understand it, Kevin Feige actually wants the X-Men to appear in a series, which I think is probably a better idea, but Disney wants the X-Men to appear in a movie, so there's a lot of back and forth going on there. I wouldn't be surprised if they split the difference and they actually end up giving us both. I mean, the plan that I had for the X-Men, I made a video on that years ago. The plan that I had for the X-Men is that you actually do both, right? You do a show for the individual characters for like their individual stories, and then you do a movie where they all basically end up coming together and like fighting as a cohesive team. I mean, a lot of people might say, well, that would confuse people, right? I mean, we're literally doing like a show on Disney Plus and then we're doing a movie and they've got to somehow consolidate the difference. I mean, I guess, but like the new Spider-Man movie has characters whose plot threads haven't been referenced in 14 years. So I'm pretty sure people could probably watch a TV show and a movie and make sense of it all. But the important thing here is that I think Kang is the way that that comes in. And I think it happens because of Secret Wars. So recently I was talking to Josh over at Denim Nerds, where we had this podcast, we absolutely killed it in the most recent episode. I'll post a link to it down in the description. But we were talking about the idea of Secret Wars. And he asked me that question. He said, when we get Secret Wars in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because it's only a matter of time until we do, and the Russo brothers direct it like they wanted it to, are we gonna see like 2015 Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman? Or are we gonna see like the original 1984 Secret Wars by Jim Shooter? And my response was, we'll see the original Secret Wars, but it'll be Secret Wars in name only. It'll actually be something more akin to like Avengers Forever or Ultron Forever or something like that. For those of you guys who don't know what that is, Avengers Forever was a landmark story when it came out because, I mean, it dealt with things like Rick Jones and the Destiny Force. None of that really matters. What does matter is that Avengers Forever focused on the idea of uniting Avengers from different time periods, right? So imagine, for example, that you saw that in the MCU, right? You saw like Avengers from different eras all coming together. So instead of getting the original Chris Hemsworth Thor, you get like Fat Thor. And then he is on a team with like Sam Wilson, Captain America, and like Robert Downey Jr. from like Iron Man 2, and like Mark Ruffalo, Incredible Hulk, and like Doctor Strange when he had just become Sorcerer Supreme after being trained by the Ancient One, right? But it's not like the characters as they exist now. And for good measure, we could throw in Peter Parker, like Spider-Man when he was wearing like the costume with the goggles, when he had like fashioned that suit for himself. We could throw him in as well, right? Regardless, it's different characters from different time periods. My thought here was that we would effectively get that, but it would also take the form of Ultron Forever. Now, Ultron Forever was a story that in some ways I think was better because it basically dealt with Doctor Doom, who was actually a Doombot, uniting all these Avengers from different time periods to defeat Ultron, who had literally conquered everything at that point in time. Like, he literally killed Odin, took the Odin Force, and was now the All-Father, right? Like Ultron was crazy powerful during that whole story arc, but it was really cool for what it was. And so what this would mean is that Kang the Conqueror would not be a villain who would be throwaway like Thanos, right? Where like he does some stuff and they kill him, never to be seen or heard from again. That he would actually linger on. That if you look at what's going on in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one, it looks like Disney and Marvel are actually learning from their mistakes when it comes to like killing off all the villains, which is a terrible decision. And two, it looks like this is just a huge narrative, right? That yes, Feige was telling the truth when he said we're no longer doing like these big 10-year arcs, but instead what we're doing are getting like small arcs that basically initiate paradigm shifts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? So like Doctor Strange deals with like the complexities of the multiverse, different things like that. But looking at everything going on, this idea of Kang and so on and so forth, that technically it looks like a 3-part story arc, at least in terms of films, but it's more like 5 when you add the TV shows in, right? So the multiversal collapse starts in Loki, it continues on in Spider-Man No Way Home, it goes into Doctor Strange 2, it goes into Ant-Man 3 Quantumania, possibly potentially eventually concludes in Loki season 2, although I have a hard time believing that a villain like Kang would basically be defeated in like Quantumania or Loki. Neither one of those movies strike me as a movie that would conclude the narrative or the story arc of a character like Kang. If anything, I could see them temporarily defeating him and then him coming to the realization, or really the superheroes coming to the realization, they can't necessarily defeat Kang. And if they really want to expand on what Kang's capable of, then in turn, he starts messing with the multiverse in both time and space. What does that mean? It means you would get teams of people, right? Whole groups of superheroes that would show up in what's basically a Secret Wars event where they're pitted against each other by Kang lest they be destroyed. And while all that's going on, they're trying to secretly find a way to defeat Kang, but they all basically face each other, but they're characters that we know from different points in time, right? So that's a way to introduce the X-Men. I mean, in that interview that Feige did, he was like, no, I mean, the whole idea of the Fox acquisition didn't really mess with our plans to introduce the X-Men. And then he went as far as to indicate that the history of the X-Men in the Fox films is actually in continuity, that is MCU canon. The only way to make that work is to take those characters from the Fox universe, bring them into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, their history intact. Basically saying that like Hugh Jackman, Wolverine, all that stuff that he experienced in the Fox films, that's all his actual history. He's just been moved from his universe into our universe as part of the MCU. The same thing that happened with Venom, all that kind of cool stuff, right? So if that's the case, and that's what they're actually doing, Kang would be the best way to do that, because all you do is you have this situation where Kang basically brings together all these characters and makes them fight. And that would be awesome, because what it would mean is the MCU could just kind of pick and choose who it is that they want, right? It's like a Blackest Night, Brightest Day kind of thing. For those of you guys who never read that story, which is an amazing story, it was over at DC Comics. It was part of Green Lantern by the writer Jeff Johns. Blackest Night was basically a story where you had the Black Lanterns, and they essentially resurrected everybody, every single superhero who ever died, and gave them a Black Lantern ring, and then they were basically lantern zombies. After that, you go into Brightest Day, and basically DC went through and they chose all the characters they wanted to keep alive, and then they gave them White Lantern rings, which purified them and then basically turned them back into normal people. Everybody else just went back to being dead, right? They were just like, sorry about your luck, guys, you're dead, right? It's that episode of The Twilight Zone, It's a Wonderful Life, right? They just got shuffled off to the cornfields by the little kid. That was it. But it looks like that's what they could do here, right? That Kang basically brings in the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and like Avengers from different time periods, even members of the X-Men and the Fantastic Four from different time periods, right? So looking at like the X-Men roster, for example, you would basically get James McAvoy as Professor Xavier, Michael Fassbender as Magneto, but then instead of like Hugh Jackman as a young Wolverine, you get Old Man Logan. And then, instead of Jean Grey, played by Sophie Turner, you get Famke Janssen Jean Grey, right? The one from like the original X-Men movies. Then you get like Rebecca Romijn Stamos Mystique, and then you get like a younger version of Nightcrawler. You get these kinds of things, right? Where you get these different versions of the X-Men from different time periods, and they kind of have to figure out who the other person is. Like, holy cow, you're me from the future. Well, you're me from the past. That kind of a thing, right? So like, it would kind of work all across the board. The same thing with the Fantastic Four. Now, I'm not saying those exact actors and those exact roles would be picked, but what it would mean is that coming out of Secret Wars, that roster of X-Men is the one that we get. That's the one that stays in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for whatever reason. Now, this is not a new concept, right? It's actually teased to be the post-credit scene for Spider-Man No Way Home. Not the X-Men and all that kind of stuff, but Venom. So I don't know if you guys have heard the rumors or not, but what people are saying is that as part of the post-credit scene for Venom, that in the movie overall, that Tom Hardy will actually appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because he was yanked into the MCU at the end of the Venom film. At the end of No Way Home, he'll end up being shuffled back off to his universe, but a piece of the Venom symbiote will stay behind. And that Venom symbiote will eventually, going through its own story arc and whatnot, bond itself to Peter Parker, and that's how we end up getting Venom in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, I'm sure there's probably going to be other story arcs that play a role in there, right? The introduction of Eddie Brock and different things along those lines, you know, Tom Holland having his own arc with regards to Venom and whatnot, but that's a rumor that's circulating around out there. Do I know if it's true or not? I don't know. But I think that Kang the Conqueror is the way in which Marvel is going to introduce different characters from across the multiverse into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and actually keep them there. Because one thing to understand about Kang. This is one of the things that makes him so significant. He's a multiversal god, right? Like, imagine you could get on a plane and fly to any country in the world, but imagine you were doing that, except instead of countries, it's whole universes. That's Kang, right? Just traveling around alternate realities on a whim, depending on how he wants to do things and what it is that he's looking to achieve. He can do that in a variety of different ways, right? Enter and exit different universes as he sees fit. So being able to like go to a universe where there's the entirety of the X-Men, snatching them up, and then grabbing the Avengers from different periods of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and snatching them up, and then he grabs Fantastic Four from different periods of time and snatches them up, right? And then they all end up facing off against each other in the Secret Wars event, and then maybe they end up officially defeating Kang at the end of that story, and then it's all like, well, I mean, you know, now that we're here, might as well hang out, right? Anybody want to do this movie's equivalent of going and getting shawarma like they did at the end of Avengers, right? Anybody want to do that? You know, and then we watch how sales of whatever that particular thing is skyrocket by like 300% like it did with shawarma. You guys remember that? At the end of Avengers 1, like Tony Stark was like, I never had shawarma. Like, we should go get some shawarma. And then like sales of shawarma skyrocketed by 300%. It was crazy. It was hilarious to see that movie having that kind of an impact. But that kind of a thing, right? Kang, I think, is one of these villains that is not going to be something like Thanos with the Infinity Stones and the snap or whatever. It's going to be on a much grander scale. And Kang is going to be the means by which they introduce these other characters and teams from across the multiverse into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Do you think this is a good likelihood? Do you think it's a bad likelihood? What do you guys think about all this? Let me know. But thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.